All right, now, I guess I recorded this the other night and or yesterday morning, and the sound didn't work, so I'm gonna give it another try here. Um, Chapter 6 we found to be really full of a lot of stuff going on, and really powerful discussion that we had coming out of this, and I hope to touch on some of the major themes. I want to review a little bit about where we've been for context here. Faith was been a major theme in the last two chapters as well as this one. Remember, back in chapter 4 was a teaching chapter, and all of the parables about seeds were kind of like the lesson leading to the quiz of the faith in the boat with the storm, and the disciples kind of don't do so well with that. And then last chapter you see um, healings of or the casting out of the demon of the demoniac, and then the hemorrhaging woman and Jairus's daughter being raised from the dead. At least the last two of those both come out of a sense of faith and the limitless potential of faith, and also coming out of a sense of desperation. That they're both Jairus, who is a Pharisee and or an elder in the temple at least, um, is must be desperate to reach out to Jesus, and he does. And so that's really kind of a powerful thing. And so all of that about the overwhelming limitless potential of faith. And then chapter 6 opens like this: he left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him, and what deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. All right, so look at this. Why did they have such a lack of faith in the town? Is it there's so this familiarity? They know Jesus a certain way, and they can't imagine anything beyond that. Now, that's an important thing, because although their faith is in Jesus, or their concept of Jesus is limited to what they know, I would suggest that the disciples is as well. It might be more developed, but yet they're still limiting. And I think that's why Mark puts this here in this chapter, um, to bring that out. I mean, we've already heard that the people in Nazareth have not, um, they thought he was crazy, right? Back in the earlier chapter. So we've already seen this. Why bring this out again? I think it's because of the sense that this idea of limiting Jesus based on what your experience of him is going to be an important piece. I also want to bring out this sense of the word astounded here, because it's going to be important later. We've seen different words in reaction to Jesus and his and the things that he's doing. One of his is amazement, another is fear. Here's astounded, which I think if we look at this in context, there's a sense of offense. Astounded is like amazed, but with two parts negative. There's something wrong with astounded. There's an affront that goes on with astounded, and an offense, and it's weird that it would come out, but listen to that. Remember that word astounded. It's going to be important later. Um, the other thing in this first little section here that I thought was interesting is this. Jesus says the famous line, "Prophets are not without honor except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house." And then it says, "And he could do no deed of power there except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them." Right? So this interesting, he could do no deed of power. Does that mean like his power is based on the faith of the people he's doing it for in some weird kind of Greek mythological way? I don't think that's exactly what's going on. What I think is going on is it is a reflection back to this word, deeds of power, right? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? They want him to prove who he is, and that's not what his mission is. He's not out to prove who he is. He is out to prove and proclaim the message of the kingdom of God has come near, and sins are forgiven. And so he's not, just in the same way that he doesn't tell people to go tell everybody about what he's doing. I think that's very similar. So he's not going to do deeds of power here because he knows that those deeds of power are going to win a cheap faith in him, and he wants to really plant the seeds of real lasting faith, right? The last there, it's he shifts it and says he was amazed, right? They're usually amazed by his powers and the things that he does, his deeds, but now he's amazed at their unbelief. Unbelief, I think, is important because that's going to come back in chapter 9. You think about the famous line, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." And so this is the first time that word is used here in the Gospel of Mark, heading towards that other important one. All right, so let's look. The scene shifts here to the mission of the 12 going forward, right? Then he went about among the villages teaching, and he called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He ordered them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not to put on 2 tunics, right? So let's look at this real quick. To bring nothing, sent 2 by 2, and he's given authority. They're given authority over the unclean spirits. Now we've seen Jesus without much problem taking care of ridding people of unclean spirits, but it's one step further to say that the disciples can do it. So we want to see whether they're successful or not. The other thing, the idea that they are to go through this with and depend upon those that are taking them in. The gospel itself is what they are going to be living off of, kind of like manna in the desert, which is going to be another important piece going further in this chapter. Check this. And he says, he said to them, "Wherever you enter a house, stay there until you leave the place. If any place does not welcome you and they refuse to hear you as you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them." Right. So we've heard this before. The idea that shaking the dust off your feet means, don't spend time trying to convert someone who just doesn't want to be converted, who doesn't want to listen. Just say, okay, move on. But I think there's more to it here, and I found this in some of the commentaries that I was looking at in the is that one of the things that Jews did traditionally was when they came back from a Gentile place, they would shake the dust off of their feet and cleanse their shoes. Like the idea that they're leaving the Gentile place behind and re-entering the promised land, the given land. And so if we remember back that the 12, and again, he calls them the 12 were back in chapter 2, were kind of cultivated as a replacement or a redefining of the tribes of Israel, and not based on bloodlines, but based on faith. Is this when it says they are testifying, as a testimony against them? So shaking off, they're basically proclaiming them to be the new Gentile, not based on bloodlines or based on status, but based on instead on faith and welcoming and hospitality. And so I thought that was a pretty neat insight to find on that verse. And then on verse 13, they cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. So look at that. So they have good, solid success, right? And so we would expect the solid success to be reported back to Jesus, but instead we have this middle section here that deals with the death of John the Baptist. King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him. But others says it is Elijah, and others said it is a prophet like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, "John, whom I beheaded, has been raised." Now, I want to bring out some Old Testament stuff that probably is important to bring in here, and how similar this story of John and Herod is similar to Ahab, Jezebel with shades of Elijah. And so there's a sense here that people think that John the Baptist is Elijah, and Herod is convinced that John the Baptist is Elijah, and now John the Baptist is Jesus. Like the sense that he has gotten rid of one, but the spirit that he's been fighting against is now found himself in Jesus. But we're going to see in the next paragraph that Herod doesn't really want to get rid of John, but he's captivated by the teaching, and even though it goes against him, he doesn't want to get rid of John, but does. So it's very similar to Ahab and Jezebel, from back in Kings. All right, so let's look at it. He doesn't want to do it, but Herodias, the daughter, and Herodias, his wife, play a role here. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. Right, so there's a sin issue here. For John had been telling Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife," and Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. She's like, "How dare you bring that up against me?" But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. Right? So again, sounds a lot like Ahab. And when he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. Right? There's something about what John was preaching that even got through to Herod. But an opportunity came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. And when his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, "Ask for me whatever you wish, and I will give it." And he solemnly swore to her, "Whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half my kingdom." And she went out and said to her mother, "What should I ask for?" And she replied, "The head of John the Baptizer." Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, "I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard, with orders to bring John's head, and he went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl, and then the girl gave it to her mother. And when his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. Right, so there's that full story there. And so there's shades of Ahab and Jezebel. There's also shades of kind of Esther's story. We kind of see that inner workings of the court kind of in a very similar way here. But the big question is, why does this put in on the heels of the disciples' success? If we look at verse 13, which was, so they went out and proclaimed, they cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them, right? That's good. And then the apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all they had done and taught. It's it's as if this wasn't here. So why put it in? Why should this be here? You'd think you could put this, meanwhile in Jerusalem. You could put this anywhere in the text. But I think what's important, what I think is coming across here, is another reminder of the cost of discipleship, and the cost of the message, the cost of being Jesus. Now he is known. Jesus's name has become known. It's already been told to us that the chief priests are plotting against him. Now Herod, dangerous, powerful king, knows about him too, and who can, kill John the Baptist on a whim and the request of one of his family. It's a precarious position for the disciples to begin. So to be in. So on the account of their success, we're given this grim reminder of the situation that they're all in. I think that's an important piece here. At the same time, though, meanwhile, back in the world of the kingdom of God, miracles are about to happen, and this is really an important miracle, the feeding of the 5,000. And the way that Mark presents it's really compels a lot of good stuff. Now, remember when we were in 2 chapters ago, in chapter 4, the sea chapter that ends with the crossing the sea and the winds and Jesus calming the storm. That began with 3 images of the word, 3 repetitions of the word sea. This one begins with 3 repetitions of the word deserted, in at least in the NRSV. So we have deserted here, deserted here, and then deserted here. Very similar to the sense of repeating the um, setting of the place in that earlier chapter as well. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the difference here. In the NIV, which a lot of the folks had at Bible study, it took that same word, deserted, 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 and the first time it translates it as quiet, the second time translates it as solitary, and the third time as remote. Now, it is always the same Greek word. So it's interesting that it would have three different things. And all of these evoke just a quiet, peaceful setting away. Deserted evokes wilderness. It evokes desert. It evokes the sense of this is a barren place that they're going to. And people who've been to the Holy Land would say that if you get away from the water, that's what you find. And I think it's important that this is the setting here, because it brings out a lot of what is really important. Because if we're looking at quiet, solitary, and remote, they want it to be quiet, solitary, and remote, but it isn't, because the crowds follow them. But no matter what, it is a desert. Okay, so let's look. The apostles gather around Jesus and told him all they had done and taught. Right, so that was the good news, but it's been squashed by this whole deal about John the Baptist. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Okay, so this deserted place is repeated twice there. Now, many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. Now, there's a couple of interesting things about that, right? It's a deserted place, but now there's a bunch of people there. And before they can even get there, they get there. The other thing that's interesting is that the disciples are in a boat, which we would think would be faster travel, and the people are on foot, but yet they get there. So there's a sense. Do you see how the desperation angle of these people? They're rushing. They want to be a part of this. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them because they were like a sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. Now, I want to talk about a couple things. I want to talk about compassion and then sheep without a shepherd. First off, compassion means, that you have feeling for someone else's pain. But the word here, we don't really have a word that kind of evokes the depth of what this Greek word means, because it's splanctha, which means your inward parts. So it's the sense that from your inward self is coming out this feeling for the other. So it's like driven by compulsion and compassion, and to not just feel, but also to have that turn into doing. It's a real deep thing. When we think of inward parts of give it your the sense of your mind, your soul, your body, your strength, but all of those things, kind of one of those is this kind of word. It's coming from that deep place inside. The other thing I want to bring out is a sheep without a shepherd, because that evokes a lot of Old Testament imagery. It evokes David, who was brought as a shepherd to be the king. It also evokes the parts in Isaiah, especially where shepherds are the leaders in Israel are compared to shepherds, and they are shepherds who have led their sheep astray. They're not good. They're the so-called shepherds of Israel, often taught. It also evokes Ezekiel, one of my favorite parts of Ezekiel, when God says that I will come myself and I will be the shepherd for the sheep. I will know them so well that I will be able to tell the difference. That's coming out here. It's a precursor to John 10 with the good shepherd stuff. It also is a great example of Psalm 23, the 23rd Psalm. God is my shepherd. He leads me beside the still waters and all of that kind of stuff. And I think you're going to see that even brought out further here and as we go. So when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, This is a deserted place, reminding that whole section. So it's not empty of people. It's not solitary. It's still a deserted place, even though there's lots of people there. And the hour is now very late. Send them away so they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy something for themselves to eat. Now, when I see this, I think of a couple of things. I think of Marie Antoinette, right? When she's the queen of France and she's told that the people don't have enough to buy bread, and she says, "Well, then let them eat cake." It just shows how separated they are from the reality of the people on the ground. One just happened just the other day, with this gas shortage going on. The energy secretary, at the president's administration said, well, if we all had gas cars, this wouldn't be a problem for us. And you're like, but gas cars are like $100,000 and most people can't afford that. Are you that out of touch thinking that you would make some kind of statement like that? So these people don't have the money. Maybe some of them do, but the great masses are coming out of here because they need to be with Jesus, because they're downtrodden and poor. And you're like, send them away because they need to go find something to eat. He answered them, you give them something to eat. They said, are we to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? Right? Jesus, are you crazy? We don't have enough money to feed all these people. You say they don't have enough money, but we certainly don't either. But he answered them, you give them something to eat. They said, are we to go to buy the denarii worth of food? And he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Then he ordered them to get all the people to sit down in groups on the green grass. But I thought we were in the desert, right? He leads me to the green grass, to the still waters, to the places where my soul will be filled, where my food I will provide myself. I am the good shepherd. All of these things are coming out in this very place here. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s, taking 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all, and all ate and were filled. And they took up the 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. Those who have eaten the loaves numbered 5,000 men. All right, so this is powerful stuff. Why does he say that there are 12 baskets? Because there were 12 disciples, and each one of them got to see this miracle taking place by their own service. It's not like they were the ones doing this. Each of the disciples had their own basket, and there was leftovers. It's a powerful image, and it's a powerful moment where the disciples do not have the faith that they could have had, it would seem, in what Jesus is really showing them. Again, they kind of doubted. Again, their hearts were rocky, the rocky soil for the seed to be planted in, because they're good until they get to a point where things don't go so well, and they're like, but Jesus, we don't have enough money. And Jesus like, go do it. And it gets done. It's pretty powerful stuff. Now, just like chapter 4, chapter 6 ends or heads to the water. Last time it was like a pop quiz. I say this time it's a similar thing. One thing I wanted to bring up here too that I didn't is the language here. Taking the 5 loaves and 2, she looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves and gave it to the disciples. That is absolutely the language of communion. And I want to make sure that came out as well. So we're reliving the quiz again. He's sending the disciples out in the boat on the sea. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After saying farewell to them, he went up the mountain to pray. When evening came, the boat was out on the sea, again, Thalassa, the mythological sea, and he was alone on the land. And when he saw that they were straining at the oars against an adverse wind, he came towards them early in the morning, walking on the sea. Again, sea, walking on the sea. They thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they saw him and were terrified. Now, I think it's important that it says ghost here, because one of the things that Jesus is proclaiming is that God is in control, that the kingdom of heaven is near. And one of the things he showed them with the earlier scene on the water when he calmed the waves was that he, as God's son, or as whatever it is, as Jesus, is able to tame the sea. And if the people saw that as mythological, that's further proof that God has power and supremacy and a monopoly on supernatural occurrences. So there wouldn't be ghosts necessarily. There would be representatives of God, or there would be Jesus himself walking on the water. And their first thought is not, oh, it's Jesus, we're set. It is, oh no, there's a ghost, right? So again, another chance for them to see the proclamation coming to view, and they don't. Now, as soon as Jesus gets there, they cry. He says, "It is I, do not be afraid." That evokes the I am language that we see in the Gospel of John, also in Exodus 3, in the name of God. The wind ceases. Now, look at this part. It says, then he intended to pass them by. In other words, he intended that they would have passed the test, and he could have just walked by and they would know, they would see him and they would be like, oh, we're at peace. There's Jesus. We're good. But instead, they're afraid. They don't. It doesn't work. He had meant to pass them by. I think that evokes the the Passover. An angel of the Lord was about to pass by. It's like Elijah in the desert too. Um, and I always get that picture of, you know, from the Ten Commandments movie, you know, and all of them are inside during the Passover. They get the lamb's blood on the door. The woman that's the Pharaoh's daughter who raised Moses comes in, but there's a sense they hear screams outside, but there should be no peeking, right? You just are supposed to sit in that room and have faith that the next day will be the Jubilee and all of that will be coming, because you have faith that what God told you is true. He wanted to pass by in that way, but they peeked, right? They doubted for a second. They said, oh, it's a ghost. That one momentary sense. Now, it doesn't mean that the game is over. It just means that here was a chance for them to show that they had the kind of faith that matters, and they don't yet, right? That's really what's there. They don't yet. Jesus hasn't given up on them. There isn't. They've gone and done amazing things, but yet there's still a piece that they are missing. Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded. Remember, astounded from the beginning of this chapter? Astounded meant amazed with 2 parts negative, right? Look at this. For they did not understand about the loaves. They didn't understand who Jesus was about the loaves. Their hearts are hardened. Again, the stone imagery. We talked about it a lot last week. It's also the seed planted in the stone doesn't hold up when the bad times happen. And here, this is what we see with the disciples here. Their hearts are hardened like stone. One of the things Dr. Blunt says in his book, and especially his other book, The Dominion of Dead, is the idea that what human beings are in terms of directed toward God's is to be vulnerable. To be vulnerable to God, to be vulnerable to what God is doing, to not be stoned and sure, but to be wondering, questioning, ready to go, ready to move, ready to accept whatever it is that comes. That's what being vulnerable to God. And it's the opposite of being stone-hearted and set in your ways. Notice how the people that Jesus knew when he was a child cannot see what Jesus has become now. They can't, right? They're astounded by it. The same way that the disciples, they might accept what they have already, the miracles that they've already seen Jesus do. They can accept the ones that they've already seen and witnessed. But we see here with 2 in a row, they can't imagine, they can't allow themselves to imagine what the next miracles will be. They have no problems understanding what Jesus has done, but they can't wrap their minds around what Jesus is capable of doing ongoing into the future. And I think that is absolutely what this chapter is about. I think that's why they have the word astounded here. I think that's why um, the John the Baptist part is in the middle, because things are going to get bad. And if you don't have the faith, if you don't have the soft, vulnerable hearted, if you're not ready for what Jesus is going on, there's no way that you're going to stand up when the time comes. And we're going to see that the disciples don't, right? And remember, we're doing this again. There's a sense that at the beginning of this study, we looked at the end of the book and how it points us back to the beginning, ever giving us another chance to try to get it right, to try to understand the limitless potential of what Jesus can do for us in our lives. Now, the closing of this chapter is that he gets back to work, right? So the disciples kind of fail at, or doubt at least, 2 direct miracles in a row, and then everything is back to work. Let's get back to work. Let's try again. When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and moored the boat. When they got out of the boat, people at once recognized him and rushed about that whole reason to began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was, and wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms. They laid the sick in the marketplace and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. Again, this is evoking of throwbacks in this back to work section. Remember the touching of the hem of the garment in the last, right? Again, that is alluded to. The also rise up off your feet, get up off your mat and walk. So Mark is referring back to things that had happened before, to keep the reader, to keep us in a sense of moving forward and back to normal, and that it's okay that you don't quite get it yet. We're pressing on, and there will be more chances. All right. So I think that this video worked this time. Going through it, I think I captured everything. I probably added a couple of things that weren't in the original. I hope you like these. I hope that they mean something to you, because I kind of like doing. They help me in my sermon preparation, and they help me in terms of Bible study as well. We have great conversations there. Hopefully you can join us someday on a Tuesday morning at 10:30. But if not, I'll see you on Sunday at church. And we'll be following up with, we're going to probably start to separate a little bit on these, because we've done all of chapter 6 now in these recaps, and I'm not going to preach on all of chapter 6 yet. There's a little bit of chapter 5 and the beginning of chapter 6 that it's going to round up the sermon topic for this week. But we will continue with Bible study and continue with these recaps, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.